We are in a bitter moment in American politics. That will come as a shock to no one. 9 years ago, I called into conservative radio show host Dennis Prager's program, a man who I greatly admire and often agree with, and asked him if he did not feel that liberal values were American values. He said, sadly in my opinion, that they were not. If liberal Americans and conservative Americans did not ultimately share deeper values, then what did that mean for American society, I asked. It means war, was his answer. We were at war. Quote, hopefully it does not become violent, he continued. But 9 years ago, one of America's preeminent conservative thinkers made clear to me that he felt our country was beyond reconciliation. Plenty on the left would have agreed. 9 years later, you might almost be tempted to say that those were the good old days. I don't have to recount all of the things that have happened between then and now. The shooting of congressmen, assassination attempts through the Postal Service, violence at political rallies, the collapsing of respect from Americans for our institutions, and the faltering of our trust in one another, to make the case that we are at an inflection point for our country. Now on the left, millions of Americans are actively seeking the impeachment of the President of the United States on the grounds that he obstructed justice, though many feel that his complicity with the intrigues of a foreign power on behalf of his election in 2016 is also still apparent. On the right, millions more Americans feel that the president has been maligned in a witch hunt fueled by a partisan media that had long since made its animosity towards him and his supporters plain, run by an FBI substantially motivated by hostility towards an outsider bent on challenging the corrupt status quo of which much of its leadership is a part. In this climate, some Americans have no patience with the idea that we should empathize with our opponents and are quick to try and shake their fellow partisans out of the spell that says that we should. On the left, the, quote, love politics, unquote, of better angels was recently called out in a piece appearing in the Washington Post by Julie Kohler of Democracy Alliance, alongside that of outgrowing American Enterprise Institute President Arthur Brooks, the author of Love Your Enemies, who we have had on this podcast, and presidential candidate Joe Biden for his rejection of anger as a path towards the Democratic nomination. She says in the piece, quote, love politics has genuine appeal. She goes on and continues, who among us could possibly argue that American politics is working or is not suffused with vitriol? Who among us doesn't want love? But like love itself, she continues, love politics is complicated. When cleaved from deeper values like truth and justice and from an honest historical reckoning, love politics falls short, unquote. Ms. Kohler feels, therefore, that the politics that Better Angels represents are naive in some way, and that they threaten a vibrant progressivism by, quote, flattening anger, unquote, at a moment when people on the left need to be angry to get things done. On the right, meanwhile, Sohrab Ahmari of the New York Post has criticized the live and let live politics of conservatives like David French for essentially ceding the cultural battlefield to the left. French, in Ahmari's view, believes in a, quote, fictional pluralism, unquote, within which, quote, people with diametrically opposed belief systems, that's actually quoting French here, quote, can live and work side by side so long as they treat each other with dignity and respect, unquote. This is a naive view, in Ahmari's estimation, one which sabotages conservatism. In his words, quote, civility and decency are secondary values. To recognize that enmity is real is its own kind of moral duty. Ms. Kohler has graciously agreed to come on our podcast, by the way. We'd love to have a conversation with Mr. Ahmari, and not to mention Dennis Prager himself as well. The one is a progressive, though, referring to Ms. Kohler, and the other a conservative, referring to Mr. Ahmari. The thing they both have in common is that they each feel that, quote, love and civility and decency, and I'm sure empathy, are impractical values around which to base one's politics. At Better Angels, we represent progressives, conservatives, and Americans who have, frankly, precisely the opposite point of view. Namely, that there is something deeply practical about emphasizing empathy and understanding in our social and political culture to the progress of our very nation. Many of us feel that this is our duty as patriots on some level to do precisely this. That is because beyond the idealistic desire many of us also feel to see the best in our fellow Americans, some of us have taken the time to observe how deeply impractical not forging bonds of understanding actually is for our society. Partisans on both sides of American politics have fought harder and harder, screamed louder and louder, in support of their positions over the last decade of American life. Yet we are no closer to solving the biggest policy challenges facing us now than we were 10 years ago, whether that is immigration reform, the national debt, gun violence, climate change, etc. Neither party commands the respect of most of the American people. Once upon a time, both parties actually did. For all of our righteous anger, our problems go unsolved. Meanwhile, the unity of the American people falters as the rest of the world watches. We often think of history as an ongoing struggle against tyranny and injustice. Much of it is that, and there's no denying Ms. Kohler's point that righteous anger has been crucial in motivating people towards action in pursuit of justice. But human history and American society has perhaps equally been defined by the challenge we have faced in living peaceably with our neighbors, among whom we must find our allies in the struggle for justice and progress by appealing to values we may share that are deeper than the politics of the moment. Hearts are not immovable, and therefore minds are not unchangeable. You could not have a democratic society if this were not true. But the truth of this does not matter if we give up on the people with whom we share a republic. To think that we can advance the progress of society while not tending to the relationships that make up a society is a view that fails in the long run. The work of uniting our country is always before us, and it is the most important work to be done. So to the liberals, conservatives, progressives, and libertarians listening, to the Americans who may be hearing the sound of my voice, I say do not be persuaded that love and decency are impractical. These are the tools by which we bring out the best in America. It is not naive to seek to unite this country.